Alaska isn't just cold. It's a land where the wilderness doesn't forgive mistakes. If you don't move, you freeze. Where sand dunes exist above the Arctic Circle, and temperatures hit 100 degrees Fahrenheit in summer, where ghost forests stand as monuments to earthquakes that swallow the land in 4 minutes. I'm about to show you the Alaska that nobody talks about. Deep in the heart of Alaska, surrounded by mountain ranges and completely cut off from the outside world, lies Whittier, a town where 90% of the population lives, works, goes to school, and dies without ever stepping outside. This is the Beggish Tower, a 14-story concrete structure that was originally built as an army barracks in 1957. Today, it houses approximately 270 people. But this isn't just an apartment building. Inside these walls, you'll find a post office, a general store, a police station, a health clinic, and even the mayor's office. Children attend school through an underground tunnel that connects directly to the residential building, meaning they can go weeks without feeling the bite of Arctic wind on their faces. During winter, when temperatures plummet and snow buries the landscape, the hallways become playgrounds. Kids run and socialize in these corridors because it's simply too cold to play outside. The only way in or out of this town is through the Anton Anderson Memorial Tunnel, a single-lane tunnel that operates on a strict schedule. It opens for 15 minutes at the top of each hour for inbound traffic, then switches to outbound. And here's the catch. From 10 p.m. to 5 a.m., the tunnel closes completely. If you miss that final window, you're trapped. Just down the road stands the Buckner Building, once the largest building in Alaska, now a decaying concrete skeleton. Its broken windows stare out like empty eye sockets. A reminder that in Alaska, even the mightiest structures eventually surrender to the cold. In 1912, the Earth opened up and screamed. The Novarupta eruption, the largest volcanic event of the 20th century, 30 times more powerful than the 1980 eruption of Mount St. Helens. In a matter of days, it buried an entire valley under ash so deep that it created cliffs 60 feet high. Today, that valley is known as the Valley of 10,000 Smokes, and it looks like another planet. Imagine standing on the edge of a vast, monochromatic desert. No trees, no grass, no signs of life. Just endless stretches of pumice and volcanic rock carved by wind and water into alien formations. For the die-hard explorer, there's a secret here. At the base of the Novarupta Dome, there's a rock signed by the original 1916 Geology Exploration Party, the scientists who first ventured into this hellscape to study what had happened. Finding that rock is like discovering a message in a bottle from the past, a reminder that humans have always been drawn to places that should kill us, driven by curiosity that overrides survival instinct. But the Valley of 10,000 Smokes isn't just visually stunning, it's dangerous. The rivers here are deceptive. They look calm on the surface, meandering through the ash like lazy streams. But beneath that surface, the volcanic flow has created instability. Some of these rivers are hundreds of feet deep, with banks that can collapse without warning. One wrong step, one moment of inattention, and you're gone. 35 miles above the Arctic Circle, In a place where you'd expect nothing but ice and tundra, there's a desert. 25 square miles of golden sand dunes that look like they were ripped straight out of the Sahara and dropped into the frozen north. Welcome to the Great Kobuk Sand Dunes, the most visually arresting anomaly in Alaska. These dunes are a relic from the past. 28,000 years ago, massive glaciers ground rock into fine sand. When the ice retreated, wind picked up that sand and blew it into the sheltered, ice-free Kobuk Valley. Over millennia, the dunes grew, shifted, and became a permanent fixture in a landscape that should be covered in snow year-round. But here's where things get truly bizarre. While the location is undeniably Arctic, summer temperatures on the sand can soar to a punishing 100 degrees Fahrenheit. Let that sink in. You're standing above the Arctic Circle, surrounded by tundra, and distant mountains still capped with snow, and the ground beneath your feet is hot enough to burn exposed skin. It's a thermal paradox that creates one of the most disorienting experiences in Alaska. Walking across these dunes feels like stepping between worlds. The sand shifts under your boots, creating that familiar desert sensation. But look up, and you'll see caribou, hundreds of thousands of them. The Western Arctic caribou herd uses these dunes as a vital corridor during their migration. Twice a year, 450,000 caribou pass through this valley, their hoof prints marking the sand in patterns that look almost artistic from above. The dunes are also a place of profound historical significance. At the edge of the sand, there's an archaeological site called Onion Portage. It's the most important record of human adaptation to changing Arctic ecosystems. Hunting camps here date back 8,000 to 12,000 years. For millennia, indigenous people have used this valley as a seasonal base, following the caribou and living in harmony with the land. On March 27, 1964 and 9.2 Richter earthquake completely changed the landscape of Alaska in just 4 minutes. Drive south from Anchorage, and you'll notice something strange rising from the wetlands. Pale, skeletal columns standing in perfect stillness. No leaves, no bark, just bleached wood reaching toward the sky like the fingers of drowning giants. This is the ghost forest. Hundreds of Sitka spruce trees that were killed instantly when the earthquake caused the land to drop nearly 9 feet. Scientists call this subsidence. The ground literally sank, allowing salt water from Turnagain Arm to flood inland and drown the roots. And because the cold water and acidic soil preserved them, they remain standing today. Walking among these ghost trees is an eerie experience. There's no sound except the wind moving through the dead branches. No birds nest here. No insects crawl on the bark. It's a forest frozen in time, a memorial to the moment when the Pacific Plate lurched beneath the North American Plate and changed everything. But here's what most people don't know. The ghost forest you see today isn't the first. Beneath the current layer of dead trees, buried in the soil, are the stumps of even older ghost forests. Trees that were killed by massive earthquakes 900 years ago and 1,600 years ago. This isn't a one-time event. It's a cycle, a reminder that the ground beneath Alaska is never truly stable. The earth here is alive, constantly shifting, constantly reshaping itself. Unga Island. If you want to travel back in time, you need to go to Unga Island, because on the northern shore of this remote island in the Aleutian chain, there's a forest that's been waiting for 20 million years. The Unga Petrified Forest. Stumps of metasequoia trees, some reaching 9 feet in diameter, turned completely to stone. These are survivors from the Miocene epoch, a time when Alaska was warm, when dense forests covered the land. When the climate was so different that it's almost impossible to imagine. The trees were buried by volcanic mudflows, and over millions of years, mineral-rich water seeped through the wood, replacing organic material with silica, cell by cell, until what remained was stone. That perfectly preserved the structure of the original tree. Getting to Unga Island isn't easy. You need to charter a boat or a small plane. And even then, the weather can turn against you in minutes. The Aleutians are known for some of the most unpredictable and violent weather on Earth. Winds that can flip boats, fog so thick you can't see 10 feet in front of you, waves that rise up like walls and crash down with enough force to shatter hulls. But if you make it, what you find is worth every risk. The petrified stumps sit on a rocky beach. Battered by waves, slowly eroding back into the sea. And scattered among them are the ruins of another kind of history. Unga Island was once home to a thriving community. Russian fur traders established a settlement here in the 1700s. Later, it became a fishing and canning hub. At its peak, hundreds of people lived on Unga. There was a school, a church, a general store. But by 1969, the island was completely abandoned. The last residents left, driven away by economic decline and the brutal isolation. Today, Unga is a ghost town. The buildings are collapsing. The church, once the spiritual center of the community, is slowly being reclaimed by moss and weather. And the only permanent resident is a legend. The locals call him the Unga Wizard. Some say he was a hermit who refused to leave when everyone else did. Others claim he was a shaman who knew the old ways, who could read the weather and speak to the spirits of the land. No one knows if he's still alive. No one knows if he ever really existed. But the legend persists, adding another layer of mystery to an already haunting place. Drive along the Seward Highway, and you'll be treated to one of the most stunning panoramic views in North America. The Chugach Mountains rising on one side, their peaks dusted with snow even in summer. The arm itself stretching out before you, a narrow inlet of water that reflects the sky like polished glass. It's the kind of view that makes you want to pull over, walk down to the beach, and just stand there, breathing it all in. But if you do that, you might never leave. Because the beaches of Turnagain Arm are a trap. What looks like solid ground is actually glacial silt. Fine particles of rock ground down by ancient glaciers and deposited here over thousands of years. When the tide is out, the mudflats look firm. People see them and think, I can just stroll out there and get a closer look at the water. And that's when the nightmare begins. Glacial silt has a terrifying property. When pressure is applied, it liquefies. Your first step might feel solid. Your second step sinks a little. By your third step, you're ankle deep. And then you're knee deep. And then you realize you can't pull your legs out. The silt creates a suction effect, holding you in place with a grip that's almost impossible to break. And here's where it gets worse. Turnagain Arm has some of the fastest rising tides in the world. The water can come in at speeds of up to 10 miles per hour, creating a visible wall of water called a bore tide. Surfers actually come here to ride it, but if you're stuck in the mudflats when that tide comes in, you have minutes, maybe less. Rescue teams in Alaska train specifically for mudflat extractions. They use specialized equipment, wooden boards to distribute weight, ropes and pulleys to create leverage. But even with training and tools, rescues are difficult and dangerous. Sometimes they fail. But Turnagain Arm isn't just dangerous because of the mudflats. The name itself is a warning. Captain James Cook sailed into this inlet in 1778, searching for the Northwest Passage. He thought he'd found a route through the continent, but the further he sailed, the narrower the water became, until finally he realized it was a dead end. He had to turn again, hence the name, Turnagain Arm, a place of false hope and forced retreat. Kennecott is a massive copper mining area that once produced some of the richest ores ever discovered. And at its center, rising 14 stories above the valley floor, is the mill. A wooden structure painted deep red, standing against the white of the Root Glacier like a wound in the landscape. Kennecott wasn't just a mine, it was a self-contained city. At its peak in the 1920s, it housed hundreds of workers and their families. There was a hospital, a school, a general store, a recreation hall with a bowling alley, and a tennis court. The company that owned the mine, Kennecott Copper Corporation, practiced what some historians call corporate socialism. The manager lived next door to the miner. Everyone ate in the same dining hall. Everyone attended the same dances and social events. It was an attempt to create a utopian community in one of the most remote places on Earth. But it was also a gilded cage. Workers couldn't leave without permission. The company controlled every aspect of life. Winters were long and dark. Summers were brief and frantic, with everyone working around the clock to extract as much copper as possible before the snow returned. And then, in 1938, the copper ran out. Or, more accurately, it became too expensive to extract, so they shut it down. Almost overnight, Kennecott was abandoned. Workers packed what they could carry and left everything else behind. Tools still hang on the walls of the machine shop. Dishes still sit in the cupboards of the bunkhouses. It's as if everyone just walked away and never looked back. Today, Kennecott is a National Historic Landmark. Some of the buildings have been stabilized and restored. You can take guided tours through the mill, walking on catwalks suspended high above the machinery, looking down at the massive ore crushers and conveyor systems that once processed tons of rock every day. But most of the town remains untouched, slowly decaying, slowly being reclaimed by the wilderness. The red paint is fading. The wooden walls are warping. Moss is growing on the roofs. In 1968, a 51-year-old retired diesel mechanic named Dick Proeneke decided to move to live in the Alaskan wilderness, alone. No electricity, no running water, no contact with the outside world. And he stayed there for 30 years. Twin Lakes, in what is now Lake Clark National Park, became his home. But he didn't just move into a cabin. He built one, by hand, using only hand tools. He felled the trees himself, peeled the logs, notched them, and fitted them together with a precision that would make a master carpenter jealous. He carved his own door hinges from spruce roots. He made his own windows. He built his own furniture. Every single element of that cabin was crafted by his hands. Using materials he gathered from the surrounding forest, and he filmed the entire process. Proeneke was an amateur filmmaker, and he documented his life at Twin Lakes with a 16mm camera. The footage he captured is extraordinary, not just because it shows the technical skill required to survive in the wilderness, but because it reveals something deeper. Proeneke didn't view himself as conquering nature. He saw himself as part of it. There's a scene in his films where he's sitting by the lake at sunset.
I think I've found what I was looking for.
Not in a triumphant way, not with pride or ego. Just a quiet acknowledgement that this place, this life, was enough. Proeneke's cabin still stands at Twin Lakes. It's been preserved by the National Park Service, and visitors can hike to it and peer through the windows at the simple interior. In the high latitudes of Alaska, where temperature inversions are common, fata morganas happen regularly. Distant islands appear to float above the horizon. Coastlines are stretched and distorted into impossible shapes. Mountains seem to hover in the sky, disconnected from the earth. And sometimes, just sometimes, these distortions can make natural features look like buildings, towers, and cities. Sailors have reported seeing phantom ships sailing upside down in the sky. Pilots have described mountains that appeared to be dimensional rifts, openings into another world. And travelers at Muir Glacier, even today, sometimes see shapes in the mist that their brains interpret as structures, as signs of civilization in a place where none exists. The Fata Morgana is dangerous not because it's supernatural, but because it's deceptive. It can make distant land appear closer than it is, luring sailors toward rocks and ice. It can make safe passages look blocked, causing navigators to change course into danger. It plays tricks on depth perception, making it impossible to judge distances accurately. And in a place like Alaska, where a single navigational error can be fatal, these optical illusions have claimed lives. There's a village in Alaska that exists in a place that shouldn't be habitable. Unaktuukpas, nestled inside gates of the Arctic National Park, surrounded by 2,500-foot limestone walls that rise like the ramparts of some ancient fortress. The name means place of caribou droppings in the Inupiaq language, and that tells you everything you need to know about why people are here. For thousands of years, the Nunavut people followed the caribou. They were nomadic hunters, moving with the herds, living in skin tents, surviving on meat and hides, and the knowledge passed down through generations. But in the 1950s, something changed. The Nunavut made a decision to become sedentary, to build a permanent village, to stop following the caribou and instead wait for them to come. It was a radical shift, a transformation from a lifestyle that had existed for millennia to something entirely new. And it came with costs. Today, Unaktuuk Pass is home to about 300 people. There's a school, a health clinic, a small store, but there are no roads connecting the village to the outside world. Everything has to be flown in: groceries, fuel, building materials, medical supplies. The nearest city, Fairbanks, is 250 miles away, a flight on a small plane that costs hundreds of dollars and can be canceled at any moment if the weather turns bad. And the weather turns bad often. Unaktuuk Pass sits at an elevation of 2,100 feet, in a valley that acts as a wind tunnel. Storms blow through with terrifying speed and power. Temperatures in winter can drop to minus 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The sun disappears for weeks at a time, leaving the village in a twilight that feels like the end of the world. But the people here have adapted. They still hunt caribou, but now they use snowmobiles and rifles instead of spears and bows. They still make traditional clothing from hides, but they also order supplies from Amazon when the internet is working. At the far western edge of Alaska, in the Aleutian Islands, there's a place that time forgot. Adak. Once a thriving military base with over 6,000 personnel, now a ghost town with fewer than 80 residents rattling around in buildings designed for thousands. This is the birthplace of the winds, a place where 120-mile-per-hour gusts are common enough that they have a name: Williwas. Sudden, violent downdrafts that can flip dumpsters, tear roofs off buildings, and knock grown men off their feet. During World War II, Adak was strategically vital. It was the launching point for the campaign to retake the Aleutian Islands from Japanese forces. Thousands of soldiers were stationed here, living in massive barracks, eating in dining halls that could seat hundreds, bowling in a state-of-the-art alley, even grabbing burgers at a McDonald's. Yes, there was a McDonald's on Adak. But when the Cold War ended and the military pulled out in 1997, they left almost everything behind. But Adak isn't just abandoned. It's dangerous. The island is littered with unexploded ordnance from World War II. They're buried in the tundra, hidden in the grass, waiting for someone to make a fatal mistake. The military marked some of the contaminated areas, but not all of them. And over the decades, the markers have faded, blown away by the wind or buried by snow. The people who live on Adak now are a strange mix. Some are contractors, working on environmental cleanup projects, trying to remove the toxic waste left behind by decades of military activity. Others are fishermen, drawn by the rich waters surrounding the island. And a few are simply people who couldn't make it anywhere else. In the middle of the Bering Strait, there are two islands: Little Diomede, which belongs to the United States, and Big Diomede, which belongs to Russia. They're separated by just 2.4 miles of water, and the international date line runs right between them. Stand on Little Diomede, and you can look across the water and see yesterday. Literally, Big Diomede is 21 hours ahead. So when it's noon on Tuesday in Alaska, it's 9 a.m. Wednesday in Russia. The locals call Big Diomede Tomorrow Island. and Little Diomede, Yesterday Isle. For thousands of years, the Inupiat people moved freely between the two islands. Hunters crossed the ice in winter, following seals and walrus. The Bering Strait wasn't a barrier, it was a highway. But then the Cold War happened. The border was militarized. Crossing became illegal. Families were separated, and the ice bridge, which had connected the islands for millennia, became a symbol of division. Even today, decades after the Cold War ended, crossing is forbidden. Russian military personnel are stationed on Big Diomede. American Coast Guard patrols monitor the waters. Life on Little Diomede is brutal. The island is essentially a giant rock rising out of the sea. Houses are built on stilts, clinging to the cliffside at precarious angles just to stay level. Wooden boardwalks connect the buildings. And in winter, those boardwalks become ice rinks, slick and treacherous. There are no cars on Little Diomede, no roads. You walk everywhere. The island has a school, a small clinic, and a store that's stocked once a year by barge. When the barge comes in summer, residents stockpile everything they'll need for the next 12 months. Food, fuel, supplies. If you run out of something in February, you're out of luck. You make do with what you have. And if you can't make do, you suffer. The people of Little Diomede are subsistence hunters. They hunt walrus, seal, and whale. They fish through the ice in winter. They gather eggs from seabird colonies in summer. And they do it all using knowledge that's been passed down for thousands of years. But that knowledge is under threat. The ice is thinning. The seasons are shifting. Animals are changing their migration patterns. And the younger generation is leaving. They go to the mainland for high school and never come back. They find jobs in Anchorage or Fairbanks or even the lower 48. As you travel through the interior of Alaska, you'll start to notice something strange. The trees are tilting, not just a few, not just in one direction, but everywhere you look. Trees are leaning at chaotic angles, creating a surreal, disorienting landscape that looks like the forest got drunk and forgot how to stand up straight. This is the drunken forest, and it's not caused by wind or disease. It's caused by something far more insidious. Permafrost thaw. Permafrost is ground that stays frozen year-round. In Alaska, it can extend hundreds of feet deep. And for thousands of years, it's been stable. Trees grow on top of it. Buildings are constructed on it. Roads are built across it. But permafrost is only stable as long as it stays frozen. And it's not staying frozen anymore. As temperatures rise, the permafrost begins to thaw. And when it thaws, the ground becomes unstable. It heaves and shifts. It creates sinkholes and depressions. And the trees, which have spent decades growing straight, suddenly find themselves on ground that's no longer level. Their roots lose their grip. They tilt. They lean. They fall. The drunken forest is a visible symptom of a much larger problem. Across Alaska, permafrost thaw is destroying infrastructure. Roads are buckling. Buildings are sinking. Pipelines are cracking. And communities are being forced to relocate because the ground beneath them is literally disappearing. In some villages, houses that were built on solid ground are now tilting at 45-degree angles. The drunken forest is also releasing something far more dangerous than unstable ground: methane. Permafrost contains massive amounts of organic material, dead plants and animals that have been frozen for thousands of years. As the permafrost thaws, that organic material begins to decompose. And as it decomposes, it releases methane, a greenhouse gas that's 25 times more potent than carbon dioxide. This creates a feedback loop. The warming climate thaws the permafrost. The thawing permafrost releases methane. The methane accelerates the warming. And the cycle continues, faster and faster. There's a place in Alaska where you don't just see the wilderness. You hear it. Bear Glacier. One of the largest glaciers in the Kenai Fjords, accessible only by boat or float plane. And if you're lucky enough to camp here, you'll experience something that most people never will: the voice of the ice. Glaciers aren't silent. They're constantly moving, constantly shifting, constantly breaking apart. And as they move, they make sounds. Deep groans that rumble through the ground like distant thunder. Sharp cracks that sound like gunshots echoing across the valley. High-pitched squeals as ice grinds against rock. And the most terrifying sound of all, the roar of calving. Calving is when a chunk of ice breaks off the face of the glacier and crashes into the water below. It can happen without warning. One moment, the glacier is still. The next, a section the size of a building is falling, creating a wave that can capsize boats and sending a boom across the landscape that you feel in your chest. Experienced guides can distinguish between different types of ice sounds. They can hear the difference between surface cracking, which is harmless, and deep structural failure, which means the glacier is about to calve. They can tell by the pitch and duration of a groan whether the ice is stable or whether it's time to move the camp farther from the face. This is called geophony, the sound of the earth itself. And at Bear Glacier, it's a constant presence. You fall asleep to the groaning of the ice. You wake up to the crack of calving. And throughout the day, you're surrounded by a symphony of sounds that remind you that the glacier is alive. If this journey through the coldest place on Earth has changed how you think about extreme environments and human capability, make sure you are subscribed so you do not miss future explorations into the most remarkable places on our planet. Leave a comment below telling me which location surprised you the most, or if there are other extreme environments you want to see covered.